Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we're going to be reviewing the 1996 film Twister. We are anticipating and preparing for the sequel that's coming out later this year, I believe in July. So this should be a fun discussion. We're throwing it back to the 90s. All right, Sarah, kick us off with an IMDb summary for Twister.
Two storm chasers on the brink of divorce must work together to create an advanced weather alert system by putting themselves in the crosshairs of extremely violent tornadoes.
All right. Let's start off with our one-sentence summaries for Twister. Sarah, what is yours?
Mine is swipe left for storm chasers.
So good. Yeah. Agreed. Maybe not qualities we're looking for. I was thinking about you throughout this movie. I was like, here's some candidates for characters that need therapy to add to your running list.
Oh my gosh. Everyone. All of them.
All of them. All right, my one-sentence summary is, sure, we can heal our childhood trauma and get our lovers back by chasing tornadoes.
Yeah. Come on, Jen. That's the most efficient way of doing both of those things.
All right. Let's dive into our high-level thoughts about Twister. We won't spoil this movie yet. It came out in the 90s, but alas, we will share our high-level review and then we will include a spoiler for this film. So, Sarah, I'm curious your thoughts about this film, and I believe this is the second time you're watching this movie. Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No, I've watched this so many times. I watched this a lot as a kid.
Wow.
I haven't seen it probably in like 20 years though. So it's been a minute. But yeah, we owned this movie when I was growing up. It would, don the TV every once in a while. I thought it was so cool as a kid too. Cause I lived in a place where tornadoes didn't exist. And so that was wild to me. And so I'd watch it and be like, oh, what? This happens in places in the US? This is so crazy. So that was always a good time as a kid because that's just not part of my context. It was wild to see. But yeah, it's probably been 20 years, probably more since I've seen this movie.
And how did it hold up?
Have you?
Oh, right?
It's a very 90s movie.
Yes.
And so I think I loved that piece of it. There's this wholesome nostalgia about it that I really, really enjoyed. So I had a fun time watching it. Even though it's not a great movie, I had a blast with it. There are some things that I think probably haven't aged super well, and some things in it that I was like, oh, this is kind of cringy. But I was surprised that Jo had a whole backstory and all of this about her. I really loved that these storm chasers aren't just these adrenaline junkies who are chasing these things for no reason, but it's tied to wanting to help people. And I like the way that the film does that. And the romance is really funny to watch now. So yeah, I had a great time. It's not a great movie, but I thoroughly enjoyed myself.
Good. Yes. And I think it'll be really fun at some point in our conversation. We can talk about the choice to do a sequel all these years later and what that will hold for us in come July. Yeah, this movie, I think my running thought throughout this entire 2-hour experience was wow, I miss the 90s. There's a good-naturedness and, like you mentioned, a wholesomeness that is so endearing. And even in these supposedly really dramatic moments where these rival factions are dissing each other, it's the sweetest thing ever. So I think that experiencing and feeling the vibe of a 90s movie again was really, really fun for me. I think as a whole, the movie doesn't really work for me. Like I think I was felt like I was supposed to be more invested in their mission and the characters and this big thing that they were looking to accomplish. But I was not invested. So I watched this movie in probably the wrong way, where I was just focused on all the wrong things. Um, and there's some really funny like visual moments that I think will be fun to talk about. But overall, I mean, it was fine. It wasn't memorable. I am very intrigued to see like what the 2024 version of this movie looks like, both from a visual perspective, but also like, will we get a better story? Because I think that the characters and their larger mission I was just disconnected with. Therefore, the whole like honestly 2/3 back half of the movie, I'm just letting it wash over me, honestly. So those are kind of my high level thoughts.
Yeah, I'm also very curious what this new movie is going to be like, especially because the technology has evolved so much, and we're not in the same situation today where they used to be, of like, not having as much warning. I mean, granted, there is still some of that, so I wonder if that's going to come into play in the new movie. But technology has evolved so much, so I'm very curious, like, what is going to be the driving mission for these characters? Or is it going to be more of the like adrenaline junkie stuff? Is it going to be more sciencey? Like, which way are we going with this movie? So that's going to be really interesting to see kind of what bent this new one takes.
Yeah, and I think it's a fascinating choice that Lee Isaac Chung is going to be directing this.
Yeah.
Like it's not what I would have expected for his next move, and like he's done such a like sentimental, sweet, character driven story with Minari that got him a lot of attention and a lot of acclaim. And I just wonder how his like sensitivity to those things might help really make this movie shine, because we are invested in the characters, and so therefore we are invested in the mission. It doesn't even matter what they're doing, we're just like, we're rooting for these people. Or is it going to take the like spectacle route, like we're really just here to see big scary twisters on a big screen and feel that visceral experience, in which case that's also going to be an interesting choice to see his take on that. I'm hoping that the character aspects are really strong, because I think it'll make the movie a lot more memorable and a lot more effective. It's something that was really missing for me in this 1996 version.
Yeah, maybe we can have both.
True. Also true. Yeah.
Maybe it'll be that rare movie where we get really like spectacular action and really solid characters, and we can have the best of both worlds.
Yeah,
I'm crossing my fingers. I hope so.
Yeah, agreed. I am glad to see though that they are not like continuing to expand the universe of Twister. Like it feels like the way it's positioned is it's like a standalone sequel, and a totally separate story, like inspired by a lot of the same ideas of someone who's like maybe been haunted by these effects from tornadoes in the past, and like has a vested interest in it. But it sounds like on the whole it is not necessarily like a expanding in the universe that already exists, which I'm grateful for. They've got some good stars in this next one too. I'm just like, wow, y'all spent the money.
Yeah, they sure did. And it's that like up and coming generation of like new stars, which is always fun to see. Like, okay, who is kind of like rising to the top out of this like new generation of actors. And I also appreciate that there's not going to be any returning cast members from the first film. And so I think that is really smart to do, that it's related to Twister, but it's not directly related to it. They're like kind of like distant cousins. They might come to the family reunion, but they don't spend a lot of time together. So maybe Twisters can pave its own path instead of having to like follow in the path of Twister, which is, it's not a great movie, but it is beloved by many. So I think that that's a really smart choice to maybe pull from that crew without maybe incurring some of that ire that comes when you reboot a beloved franchise after many years.
We don't need like a cameo of like Joe, Helen Hunt in her old age showing up to like give the last piece of advice that is exactly what they needed to complete the final mission. Like we don't need that cameo where they show up and, you know, the audience gasps, she's back. No.
Mm-hmm. Yep, they're paving their own path. They're chasing their own twisters.
Well played.
Yeah.
I just also like, it's fascinating that they're not calling it Twister 2 either. I don't think Twisters with an S is probably the smartest choice. Can you imagine like sitting down and watch a movie and you're like, okay, let's watch Twister or Twisters? Which one are we doing?
Yeah.
Which one are we watching?
It's very silly.
It's very silly. Surely we could have come up with a better option.
Yeah, it's not great, but we're going with it, and hopefully we will see many twisters in that. What if it's just like there's only one and they're just following it for a whole 2 hours? That would be such a letdown. We need multiple twisters.
I know, right? Meanwhile, in Twister, we get like 4 different twisters. Yes. Oh. All right. Well, let's include a spoiler alert. So if you haven't seen 1996 Twister, we recommend check it out before continuing to listen to the rest of this episode. Okay. Where shall we dive in first? What stood out to you most in this like 20 years later viewing experience of this movie from your childhood?
Yeah, I think there's a lot about this movie that's really funny, and especially the entire premise of, okay, I'm gonna take my fiance to this dangerous location where my wife is to get her to sign divorce papers, and introduce my fiance to this ragtag crew. Like that premise alone is so silly, and it's so 90s, and it makes no sense.
So endearing.
And I kind of loved it. And what kind of amazed me about watching this now is the whole movie is trying to get you to really not like the fiance, not like Melissa. And the whole time I'm going, I'm kind of rooting for her. Like, she's annoying, but I was like, she's kind of the only sane person in this movie. Like, I want her to get out, and then she does. And so I was like, wow, that's such a different way to view this, because you're supposed to kind of almost see Melissa as like this like villain. She's between Bill and Joe and their undying love for each other and twisters. Yeah. And I'm watching this and I'm going, actually, she's not the bad guy. Like, Bill is the bad guy in this movie, and why is this positioning this in this way? So it's funny watching these things so many years removed now as an adult with a different lens. I was like, I see what you're trying to do, 90s, but it's not working on me in 2024.
Nope. Well, I love that. Of course, Melissa's there in her like white linen blazer. Like that is also such a nice to be like, here's Joe, and she's cool, and she wears a white tank top, and then of course Melissa's got like the perfectly coiffed hair, and she's got the blazer on. Like, yes, we get the foil is very clear to us. We're not playing in any subtlety and nuance. It's the 90s, you know. So I just thought that was really funny, and you're right. In a lot of ways, she is the audience stand-in. Every time she is freaking out, I'm like, yeah, I empathize greatly with you, woman. And you see like Joe's recklessness, and I don't know. I think that there's a version of this movie where like we really are invested in Joe, and I think the opening scene where we see her childhood, like we kind of like, I'm like halfway there, but also I'm not really rooting for her by the end. I'm rooting for like the crew as a whole, but I think that disconnect, I was like, I feel like I'm watching this movie the wrong way. I'm rooting for the wrong characters. I don't know who I'm rooting for, really. Maybe I'm rooting for the Twister.
Yeah. I felt similarly. I think that there's some timing and pacing issues with this. Because I think what I would have liked is if they had removed one failed Twister scene, and we only have like 3 Twister chasing moments, and use that extra time to really take us into the plan, or like show us that they really know what they're doing. Because I think for me, what I really struggled with is like, y'all don't seem to have a plan. And I mean, you can only plan so much with tornadoes, so I get it. But they would be like, okay, we're gonna run into this tornado, and then it's like, oh crap, no, we can't do it. Oh no, now we have to hang on to this piece of wood and hope that we don't fly away. Like, come on, can we do a little bit better with this? Y'all have been chasing tornadoes for so long. Don't we have a little bit more of a plan? And so I think if we had seen maybe some of that competency from her and the crew just a little bit more, then it would have, I think, helped me be rooting for them even more than I was. Because it's just kind of this like philosophical, like, I know the movie is trying to get me to root for these characters, so I guess I will, rather than me being actually like invested in them as much as I should have been.
Yes. I totally agree, which I had this whole existential crisis in the like 3rd act of the movie, because I'm like, am I just like far too practical in my brain cells to be able to just enjoy this movie? Because I have a whole note jot down here where I'm like, maybe because I'm not invested in Dorothy, question mark, question mark, question mark. Like, it's, how is this going to work? This is not a sustainable solution for manufacturing at scale. And also, there's that whole little scene at the end where the little sensors like light up and they look like these magical little fireflies that like arise into the air. Like, is this not aging well? Or also am I the problem? Or could the movie have designed this better? Was my 3 strands of possibilities.
I mean, multiple things can be true at one time.
Yes.
Because there were so many times throughout this where I was like, okay, you went through the process to build 4 of these suckers, okay, with all of your many, many little sensors, and you haven't like tested any of this. Like, I know, like, I'm not a science person, so if you are a science person listening to this, I'm sorry, but there's probably a way to like simulate elements of a tornado, even if you don't know how it works. So like, wouldn't you have found ways to like test parts of your system before making it at scale like this? Like, what are we doing?
Right.
But if they had done that, then we wouldn't have a fun little arts and crafts montage we are driving to the next tornado. Yes. So at least we got arts and crafts along the way.
I have a whole note jotted down about that sequence where they're making the, like, they look like little Christmas ornaments, and they look like they're having a nice little like team bonding activity where we get to decorate them and put little bows on them. Like, I'm like, something is disconnecting in my brain here. I don't get it.
Whimsy, Jen. Whimsy. Because you need to be whimsical and fun whilst chasing a tornado that could murder you.
Of course. That seems like a priority. Let's put a bow on the like 150th sensor that's going to fly up into the air, because it must look beautiful. We got to make sure it's primed and primed when it meets the Twister that comes.
It's true. Aesthetics are important.
Yeah. Well, and then there's also the whole like, surely having 2 human beings like be literally in the path of danger to try and figure out how to put this device, this Dorothy device, in the exact line, like the pathway of the Twister. Like, this is not gonna work. And like, oh, by the way, there could be a tree branch that comes out and like knocks Dorothy away. Like, I'm like, even when they get it successful by the end, I'm like, okay, I get this is like an exciting moment, but also I'm like, this is just kind of luck at this point. You know what I mean? So maybe a better invention that I could get behind would have made this a more thrilling experience. Because I'm not bought into this. I'm like, nope, none of our dollars should go to spending more money on making this a thing.
Yeah, yeah. I wish that there had been a little bit more
science,
a little bit more of that like process stuff. Like show us why it's going to work, show us your plan of why it's going to work. And it does a little bit of that, but it leans more into the adventure part of it instead of here is our plan, it's going to work, we are scientists, we have figured this out, and then things go wrong and they have to adapt. And it's those thrilling moments of watching them adapt because we get to see their competency and their intelligence throughout. And then we get like the big explosive, like twistery moments as like kind of the cherry on top. But this kind of does it in reverse. It's like blah, 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 science stuff, big tornado action, blah, 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 science stuff, tornado. Like, and that's just not as effective, I don't think.
Actually, that's a really great point, which is that after every failed attempt, there's never a moment where we as the viewers understand like what went wrong, what happened here, you know, and like how are we gonna like try something different and like test a new thing for the next time. Because I think that's what makes those like progressions and feeling of progress in a movie feel exciting. It's like, okay, we put it in this path this time, but a tree branch hit it, so we gotta like pick, I don't know, a twister that's not going through, I don't know, something, to ensure that this doesn't happen again. And we try it again. That thing that we tested for, great. We successfully avoided that thing, but now there's a new hurdle that we didn't even anticipate, didn't even know about. Like this is a scientific method, people. You know what I mean? Like I think that is inherently thrilling because it feels like we're taking steps towards progressing and learning, and then we're highly invested in what happens by the end of this being successful or not. But in this movie, they basically try and they fail, and then somebody has maybe an emotional breakdown. Joe has an emotional breakdown. Melissa has an emotional breakdown. We like go get some like pancakes and coffee, go visit Aunt Meg, and then we're like, okay, let's just try it again. Like surely we will just try again and that will be the solution. Like and if that is the approach that they're taking, maybe there's a better way to make that more thrilling, but it just feels like a little bit of a lost cause if they're just like blindly testing again, just to try again with no real change in their approach.
Yeah. And I think there's also a way to highlight better the limited resources that they have. You know, they only have 4 of these things, and yet the film doesn't ever focus on that. It's just kind of like, oh, just load up the next one, no big deal. You know, oh, we'll just try another one, try again, as opposed to this like real, like, okay, this didn't work, but we only have 2 of these left. So we need to figure out how to make this work. Otherwise we're screwed. This is not going to happen. And I feel like the movie tries to do that, but doesn't do that as effectively as it could, because that limit of the amount of Dorothys they have is a good way to set the stakes, set that tension, and make sure that we know that this has to work. In addition to, you know, we want our protagonists not to get sucked up by the twister, but I think highlighting their limited resources could have helped make that more tense and more exciting and make us more invested in each one of the twister moments.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, because they do share that detail at the beginning, and so like every time one of their Dorothys gets taken out, I'm like, oh, we've only got a few more left. And I think even seeing their decision making together of like, is this next F4 tornado, is it worth it? Is it going to give us the results that we need? And like for them to like talk about that and like maybe disagree and then ultimately like try and then decide. Like I think there's some really fun character moments that could happen there as well. But no, the whole ragtag team is just like, another one's coming, quick, get in the car, let's go. You know?
Yeah, let's go.
You're like, okay, I guess we're going. Like we're like Melissa, we're like, what, we're doing this again? Yeah,
because like it doesn't make sense if it's taken you this long and presumably quite a bit of money to create 4 of these. why are we just being all willy-nilly with them? I don't understand.
And it could have been really neat to see the way that like maybe Jo's like personal connection to this mission is like clouding her judgment in some moments, and the team, or like there's like character development that can happen when she's like, we got to do this, we just got to do this, because there's a desperation, there's a drive in her to just make it work, and for her team to be like, hey, like I know, like let's talk through this, is this the right thing to do? I just think we see her like personal connection and like the emotional investment she has in this come up a couple of times, but it doesn't actually ever affect the mission. It like makes for some emotional moments between her and Billy, where he's like, I'm here for you, you don't need any of this, but other than that, like it doesn't really affect the mission. And I think it could have been really fun to see the way that, like we were talking about, the action and the mission are then intertwined with the character development and the people that we're following, and then both things exist together and they're fueling each other. That would have been really great.
Yeah. I wish that there had been a little bit more for Jo. Like I was shocked at how much there was about her, and like how strong her character was, and all of her backstory and all of that. Like I was pretty surprised at that. But I did want more, and to like better understand who she was, like we know that she's a storm chaser, we know that she's a doctor, we know that she's hard-headed, we know that she went through this traumatic experience, but that's kind of it. Like we don't know much more about her other than her trauma and how she's brought that into her whole career and made it kind of her whole life. And so I wish that there was a little bit more to her than that. But I did appreciate that like we get to see some glimpses of underneath all of that, there is a desire to help people. And so like this vendetta that she has against tornadoes is actually because she wants to like help other people and like protect other people and make them safe. And I did appreciate that thread throughout this, and how we don't just see the tornadoes kind of in isolation, but we see them ripping through the drive-in. We see it ripping through her aunt's town. We see the effects that these can have, which then is like, oh, that's why they're doing this, is to help these people who live in this area be better equipped to stay alive, honestly, as these weather events happen. I just wish that those tie-ins were a little bit stronger, because I think that guiding principle of we want to use science to protect people or use science to keep people safe is so good. And like we can all buy into that mission. But I don't feel like the film connects those things maybe as well as it could have, or as well as I would have liked it to. And I think if those were more connected, that would have helped us be way more invested in the mission and way more invested in Jo as a character too.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's a pacing issue, because those moments come quite late in the film where we see the effects, and the only thing that we are connecting together for Jo basically is the opening sequence, and the fact that this is deeply personal for her. We've seen her lose a loved one in this. And so you can kind of like, put two and two together and understand that like likely her goals are inherently altruistic. But we don't get to feel it. Like we know it cognitively, but we don't get to feel it in the same way until honestly that Aunt Meg sequence, and we get to see how much the tornado has totally like rampaged through this neighborhood, and there's shots of the family like emerging out of the storm shelter, and like all of that helps us like feel it emotionally. And up until then, we're just kind of running on cognitively understanding that they're trying to help people. She's seen this, it's personal for her, but we don't get to connect those dots until a little bit later. Let's talk a little bit about that opening scene, because as the movie began, I was impressed. I was like, this is so well shot in this opening sequence. Like the cinematography choices, the way that like using the dog Toby as another source of like tension and adrenaline in an already really intense scene. Like I was immediately impressed when the movie began in the first, 5-10 minutes at that scene and how on the edge of my seat that I was. And it's not even relying on, like big, incredible graphics, because, this is from 1996 and like things look like they're from the 90s, but just the shots of like the shelter door and that clasp like rattling, like it was so well done on creating a visceral experience for me right off the bat, with this film, which I was quite impressed by.
Yeah, I was surprised at how good this still looks. Like obviously there are some pieces that don't look great just because of technology and
magical
the way that
fireflies.
Advanced. Yes. But honestly, like the creativity to figure out how to use practical effects to simulate what it would be like to be in a tornado, I think is really impressive. And so that opening scene is a great example of that, as we don't have to see the tornado. We can just see the effects of it and how terrifying that would be to be in that situation. Yeah, I was impressed at how good this still looks for the most part. And just shout out to practical effects, like the more that you can use them, I think the better that your movie will hold up in the long run.
Yeah, totally agreed. And I think honestly, out of all of the like big action sequences in the film, I think for me the opening scene is the strongest. It's the best one. Like we get a lot of like shots of the twisters in the later half of the movie, but I think from a cinematography and a filmmaking perspective, I think the opening scene is just so much more highly effective for me in creating that sense of like, oh my god, like the little girl yelling for Toby to run and to come to run, Toby. Like that immediately adds this whole nother layer of emotional investment in this scene. Like, okay, yes, the family is safe, but now I'm also highly invested in this dog getting safe too, because one, it's a dog, but two, it's this girl's like best friend, and the cutting back and forth between the family getting safe into their shelter, the twister coming, all of the effects of it, and then cutting to this dog like in the home. I'm like going down the stairs. It offered so many layers of adrenaline beyond just the cognitive. Like obviously we're seeing that these human beings are trying to stay safe from this very scary natural disaster, but the way they can do that like macro view, but then also at the micro level, like I just want this dog to get in this dang shelter as fast as possible to be reunited with the little girl. Like that in and of itself is thrilling enough, regardless of like, even if the twister's not there, just like I need this dog to get back into the shelter with the girl. I just thought that the layering of that at the macro and micro level was so good.
It's so smart because
yeah,
we're always going to root for the dog to be safe,
like yes,
even if you're not a dog person, if we open up a movie and you're like, oh, a dog is in danger, let's make sure that it's okay. Like, man, that's just the way to hook you. It's the way to get you invested early.
Especially when the dog is trying so hard, so diligently to run as fast as its little feet can run. And it's all like this timing thing, because that twister's coming like any minute now. And so even if the dog's like 10 feet away, that dog needs to get there in time. And so just like the time factor made for some really fun stuff in that opening scene. So good.
Oh, so good. And it's the tiniest little dog too, which is so funny too. Its little legs were running as fast as they could.
Yep. And then the scene twists, no pun intended, again, when the dog makes it safe, but then all of a sudden, like the dad is now in danger. And so like the minute you get a moment of like, okay, yes, Toby's here, we made it. There's another turn in the scene where you see the father like looking to protect his family, and ultimately he gets taken up by the twister. And so like the emotional roller coaster we go on in the like 5 to 7 minutes that scene is just, it's really great. And understanding the scene understands the timing of, we're going to give you this moment of victory, Toby is safe, but someone else we care deeply about is now no longer safe. So good.
Mm-hmm. They got you hooked right in.
Yep.
And then you were disappointed for the rest of the movie.
I honestly, from this opening scene, I was like, oh, this is going to be good. We're going to get some great action. Honestly, the rest of the Twister scenes are not at that level of, like creative filmmaking and shot placement and well-designed action sequence. Like they were fine. It was okay. But man, that opening scene was just top notch compared to the rest.
I do think that there's also something kind of the Jaws principle of it's almost more exciting when you don't see whatever the thing is, the shark, the monster, the tornado, whatever, but you see the effects of it, and you see how people are reacting to it, and you can like feel the danger of its presence without having to see it. And I wonder if that's also part of the reason why that works, is because we're not focused on the tornado itself. We're focused on these people and them just trying to survive. And there's something about that is so visceral, intense, because then when you bring in the tornado, you bring in the shark, you bring in the monster, whatever, we start to focus on that instead. And so even when I was watching, it's like, oh wow, now I'm paying more attention to the tornado than I am these people. And that probably does something to like take us out of the tension and gets our focus maybe on the wrong thing, instead of being even more invested in these people as they're trying to survive.
Yeah, no, that's so good. That's so good. It's also like the Hitchcock effect too, like in from a horror and thriller perspective, like to show the screams, to show the blood in the bathtub versus the actual act of it is actually more of a thrilling experience for our brains to imagine and fill in the gaps that exist. Like that is more terrifying for us. One of the things that I wish that the film, to this kind of on the same vein, that the film leaned into a little bit more is just like the foreboding sense of like that anticipation of when the twister comes and the storm is brewing. And there are moments where I was like, they're starting to get it. They do this thing where all of the characters talk about the twister like it's a monster, and we hear it like growling in the distance, and we hear the wind beginning to whip around in the context that the characters are in, like, and the way that the characters refer to it feels like it's a monster of some kind. They're like, it's coming, like what is it gonna do next? Like they almost personify the characters, the twister, to make it feel like a whole character. And I think had they leaned into that even more, I think it would have made some of those scenes also much more exciting and thrilling, and deploying some of the same things that you mentioned around not showing the twister immediately. Because honestly, a lot of those later twister action sequences, we see the character like looking off into the distance and seeing the twister on the horizon. They're like, it's coming. And it's like, maybe we focus on the character feeling the growling of the wind and the wind whipping around, and don't show us the twister until much later on. I think it needs to maybe lean into a little bit more of the horror, thriller, suspense genres tactics to make some of those action sequences even more exciting.
Honestly, now I'm really loving an idea of this being a horror movie.
Yeah,
like, can we retool this into a horror movie? Because I feel, I mean, tornadoes are pretty horrifying. Yeah, like you're right to be scared of them. So yeah, is there something here that we could make some tweaks and lean into those horror moments to make it even more exciting? And then like really, and I mean, granted, it is the 90s, so movies were a little different back then, but this like really play up the danger and there is some of that in this, but like play up the danger so we understand better the sacrifice that these characters are making, which again would then point you back to the overall importance of the mission. The mission is so vitally important that they are going to put their lives in danger, because nobody, except for the bad guys, gets hurt in this. Like,
yep.
you know, like Aunt Meg's house falls on her, but she's not chasing a storm. And then like Bill Paxton's character just gets like a cut on his eye, and that's kind of it.
After, the daintiest little cut I ever did see.
Yeah. So like play up the danger, play up all of that so that we're more invested, because everybody's covered in plot armor unless you're driving a black SUV. So there wasn't really any danger in this, which kind of like diminishes the stakes of everything. So we'll see. Again, that's one of the reasons why I'm excited for this new movie, is because we don't have a problem playing up the danger in some movies in 2024. So I'm hoping that we have fewer characters covered in plot armor, and we might actually have some higher stakes in this new movie.
Oh my gosh, they are decked out in plot armor in this movie. Are you kidding? Like the ending scene where what's their face? Joe and Bill are like literally in the middle of the twister, and there's like wood and debris flying around them everywhere, and they come out spotless. I'm like, I call bullshit on that. Like they really just emerged as if like untouched. And the thing is, you see the wood and the debris flying all around them, because obviously we've got to show that they are in a twister. But no, they're fine. They are ready for their makeout sesh in front of their entire team,
which they wait to do until they have an audience. And I'm like, hold on here. Hold on, folks. I am not here for this. That's fine. It was an adrenaline inducing moment. You just survived a near-death experience. There's chemistry, hormones, all of the things going on. But hold the phone. Homeboy was just engaged to another chick who just left like 3 hours earlier. Y'all are still married, but you had signed the divorce papers like 20 minutes ago. Yes. What are we doing? This is no. Nope. If this is where we're heading, I need a better setup for this, because I got to call BS on this, especially you making out in front of your whole crew. Like, no, not here for it.
Yes, I know. Well, I love also the pan out shot of them continuing to make out, and the whole team's just like running around with their dogs, like they're like, okay, let's just let's turn the other direction now so they can have their moment. But like full on makeout sesh still happening. It's such a 90s move. You know what I mean? Like it's so endearing.
Yeah. Yeah, we all knew that it was coming, but that was one of those moments that was so cringy, because they wait so long.
Yes.
Like I was like, okay, I'm totally fine with, okay, we're going to make out a little bit, because you almost just died. And so like I get that. But it's the pause that I didn't like. Like as soon as you realize you're safe, go for it. And then your crew comes up, and then you stop and you talk to your crew like normal human beings.
Yes, exactly. And then you talk about the like, we need to get funding. We need to start the lab. Yeah, that's a perfect conversation for when your crew has showed up. And well, I love that like they start making out and the whole team is like clapping and celebrating. It's just like so endearing, so wholesome.
It's really funny. I loved their crew. They were so much fun to hang out with. Just these dudes just being dudes. And it was just so much fun to just spend time with them. And phenomenal casting. And they just look like they're having a great time. And I just wanted to hang out with them some more. So I think on that aspect, I was like, okay, this is a crew that I want to be part of. I'm not super sure about Joe. She's fine. I don't like Bill. he's not a good guy in this movie. But everybody else, I was like, yes, I want to be friends with you. Let's hang out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. Jo kind of irked me throughout this movie, and I'm putting my finger on why, but I think she's just like there's so much tunnel vision that she has that the crew loves each other. The crew loves her. I didn't see as many of the moments where like she was connecting with them, and so I'm just like, this feels like you're obsessed with this thing, and we're gonna do this thing, and you're like charismatic and like enough of a leader that like yes, we're just gonna follow you to the ends of the earth, but maybe going back to like what we were talking about earlier, like if this is her invention and whatnot, like just a little bit more guidance, a little bit more stewardship of her crew, a little bit more leadership. I would have liked to see. I don't know. I didn't connect with her at all. So that was tough. But the crew, yes. Also, seeing young Alan Ruck, that was so I didn't realize he was in this movie until he showed up on screen. I was like, is that who I think it is? Looks like a baby.
Yes. Yeah. And then my favorite is of course Philip Seymour Hoffman. Seeing him in this. He's so fun and has that just screen presence that anytime he was anywhere in the frame, I was looking at him. And I loved the moments, especially in the beginning, when he is kind of like entrusted with Melissa. And yeah. He's just a dude being a dude. And it's so funny to watch him just chatting her up and just being so excited about all of the things. And she is like, why am I here? And that juxtaposition is just perfect. And one of my favorite little moments is after it's when they initially meet and Bill sends her off with him while he's trying to get Jo to sign the divorce papers or whatever. And then Dusty and Melissa are walking back and Dusty is holding her hand the whole time and escorting her back to Bill. And I thought that was so funny that he was just holding her hand. I loved it.
Yeah. The whole sequence after the thrilling opening scene, like everything from like the wide shot of the car driving in the country, there's like this like soft rock playing in the background for the score of like when Jo and Bill are having their like first initial conversation. You know, like the soft rock of the 90s. There's just like this earnestness that is so endearing. And then all of those moments with Dusty too. That whole like 10-minute sequence of Bill and Melissa showing up and we get acquainted with current day Jo. It's just screaming the 90s. The score just killed me.
So good. Oh, it's so good.
My other little like this is really cute 90s earnestness moment is when Bill and Jonas are having the fight in the parking lot, and it's supposed to be this like really big dramatic scene where like these two foes are like duking it out, but it's the most like sweet and endearing disses that they're throwing back at each other, where they're like, you're a loser. And Bill goes, well, we'll see who gets there first, pal. And it's like meant to be like, ooh, that was a diss. So endearing.
Well, and I think that this was originally like rated R or something. Like it was there was more language, there was more like all of the things, and they had to like take it down a bit. So I think that's why some of the insults you're like, okay, that was like a middle school level insult. You really wanted to include a swear there, but you couldn't because of the ratings. And so there are certain things like you'll see, I think at one point, like Jo clearly swears, but you don't hear it because they changed it after recording. And so it's little things like that where I was like, oh, that's why this is like this, is because you didn't want this to be rated whatever. They needed to tame some language down.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. but it's also just like right for the characters too. You know what I mean? Like at no point are we like Bill and Jonas are really going to go at it, and they're both like, you know, intense, ambitious, like passionate, like evil. Like you're just like two good guys trying to like, you know, duke it out a little bit. They got a little bit of a rivalry, but it's all good natured fun.
I do love that Jonas is supposed to be this like corporate sellout and he's the bad guy. And because he's a corporate sellout, he has a fleet of black minivans. And I was like, yeah. If you want to show that somebody is really sold out and is going after money rather than science, it's through a minivan. That's how you do it.
The entourage of like all of them are like sleek black too.
Yeah.
That's the key.
It's so funny. I was like, wow, we're chasing tornadoes in our minivans, which are fine cars, but it was just supposed to be this like tough, menacing crew that we're not supposed to root for in their minivans.
Oh, it's so good. So good. The other key indicator is that he's got these like really cool shades and they look expensive. Mm-hmm. And he like, you know, puts them on. You're like, oh, he's fancy schmancy. He's got money. He's got sunglasses.
Oh, it's so good. Again, like I'm very interested to see what the 2024
Me too.
movie does. Like, is there going to be a rival situation like that? And how can they make it not a silly caricature of a rival, but actually use that to increase the tension and the stakes of the movie?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. And the other thing that we were talking about with this 1996 version is just like the camaraderie of the crew. And I think we've got some like really charismatic actors and actresses in this July 2024 version of this film that I think should make for some really fun chemistry together. So I think that'll be fascinating to see. We've got Daisy Edgar Jones, we've got Glenn Powell, Anthony Ramos. Like there's some good charismatic people to help create that vibe. Storm Chaser Squad.
Yeah, we'll see. This should be interesting.
Should be fun. I think it'll be really fun. Yeah. Either way.
Yeah, I hope so.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any other last thoughts about Twister? Wrap up. Another
thing that I thought was absolutely ridiculous about this movie was this idea of Bill Paxton's character being like this like human barometer, and he can sense the storms, and he just has to go out and he has to touch the dirt and he's going to know exactly what's going to happen with the storm. Like it was so silly to me. I was like, okay, could we have removed that and maybe done some character something? Or like even providing like a better contrast between him and Joe, you know, like if she is like science and data and like she has studied these things so much, and then he is like feeling, so she's the head and he's the heart kind of thing, and you can see their contrast, and then that creates conflict or something, you know, like I don't know, if we're gonna do that, let's make it add to the plot somehow. But this doesn't do that. He touches some dirt and looks longingly at the sky, and then we're off to the races again. And it's like, okay, you're just kind of guessing at this point, you know? I don't know. I feel like that could have served a purpose, but it didn't. And so it just ended up being ridiculous. And I wish that we kind of didn't have that.
Ridiculous and silly. I know there's that whole scene where he's like staring off into the horizon like Luke Skywalker as like the dirt is falling dramatically from his fingertips. I'm like, this is going to do well for you for your golf game, and I'm sure you look like a golfer, so good job, buddy.
Oh, it's so good.
All right. Well, this is our review and discussion of the 1996 film Twister. You can find it available to rent on multiple streaming platforms. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us. Our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. So everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review letting us know your thoughts about today's episode. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at Movies and Us Pod, or email us at moviesanduspod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to discuss the film If. You have an amazing week, and we'll see you very soon.